Hello, and welcome to another episode of Care to Explain. So, yes, I know. So, this is episode 4. Are we on episode 4?
We are episode 4. Look at us.
Oh, how exciting. Oh. So, Anna, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good. It's been an interesting day. I have had a meeting with providers for Dorset Council and CQC as part of their inspections. That's been interesting. I've had a board meeting. I've had a meeting with my TAs. And it's only Tuesday. And how's your week so far?
Yeah, it's been good actually. I'm really excited. Great week so far. We've been building your tech, and yeah, that's what I've been doing. Just focus on tech. And of course, writing tenders as I usually do. So yeah, all the things I love. So far, so good. And of course, preparing for Christmas.
Preparing for Christmas. So I
Preparing
think
for Christmas.
one of the things that probably our potential viewers we don't even have got any, don't know is that Obi has a 1-year-old. He was literally 1 last week. He's actually not just her baby, he's my baby too. But a 1-year-old for Christmas is very, very exciting. But Christmas in the care sector is monstrously exciting as well. And we prepare and have the best time, and we involve families, and we
Yeah.
involve everybody around us, and the circle of support, and it's just so special and so magical. And actually, for me, on Sunday, I took my brother, who has Down syndrome, on a steam train, and we saw Santa. I don't know who's my
Yeah, ever. I used
best
to
thing.
share those videos, Anna. Oh, actually, you've got them on your link on your Instagram, actually.
I have. We should. I would love to share those, because watching somebody who, as he calls himself, the big Hawaii 50, 50, meeting Santa Claus on a train is just so amazing, and it's just like. But I think in terms of how the week has been for everybody in the care industry, it's high stress right now. It is high stress. You're stressed. I'm stressed. The providers are stressed. Our bloody producers are a bit stressed, quite frankly. With
Stressful
that.
year, to be fair.
Yeah.
It's been a stressful year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So on a part it's now even more stressful. Are you making reference to the employment right bill that's making it even more stressful as
I think that there's two really big things going on. So, and as we've just pre-recorded, haven't we? So I think it's really
yeah.
important to mention that in a minute that this will be linked in with our amazing team, where we spoke to Mark Tyson, frequent flyer consultant, extraordinaire, where we talked to him about the Employment Rights Act and CQC and Chris Badger and all the things that are going on. But the most important part for me today, and anyone who listens to this, is get yourself online and answer consultations. The CQC consultation
Yeah.
about this is what we're going to do. Do you agree? And the Employment Rights Act, this is what's going to happen to you. Do you agree? And I
Two-peak
can say that.
consultation. And I think it's important that you say the deadline as well, because the employment rights deadline is closer, isn't it? At 18th of December. So please get involved.
18th of December. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the CEC one is ongoing, and I'm doing a webinar in the next couple of days with, a legal firm to talk about this is what it means, because they're quite complicated questions. But I think what's really important is that you said it earlier, Obi. If you don't have your say because you haven't chosen to buy into the consultation, do not moan about it, because all of the care associations across the country, and I mean across the country, are supporting you and giving you the information. So if you go on the Dorset Care Association website, there's every consultation, every bit of data that you need to understand. And it will, pardon the pun, and nobody will cringe at this, it will bite us on the arse. Sorry, but it will, if we do not fill this in. And everybody can do it, whether it's, something the domestic team, the kitchen team, the carer, the registered manager. We have to have our say, because if you don't, things are going to get super tricky. However, a lot of it has been put together to protect us, not necessarily in the right way. So have your say.
Brilliant. So, Anna, what are we talking about today? What should our listeners expect to hear today?
Oh, well, so we've had the amazing Mark Tyson dip in and dip out. We've allowed him some, airtime. He's answered some.
Allowed him some airtime.
We have allowed him some airtime. We've let him into our gang, haven't we, Obi? But, you've asked some really pressing questions. I've asked some pressing questions, and he's answered them actually really, really well. But I think this is a tricky time right now for care providers and families, actually, because I don't think they realise the impact of some of the decisions being made from government down, and our kind of regulators that are coming in. And I really, really encourage people who are maybe have a family member or someone they care about or somebody they're just supporting, learn about it. Because
Yeah.
if your voice isn't heard, their voice isn't heard. So the voice of the people that Obi and I care for and support, we need you as providers and carers and family members and commissioners to think about
Yep.
them, because Mark said earlier and you said earlier, Obi, in fact, you said it, it's the outcomes of that person's life. So the consultations that are open right now all lead into their outcomes, don't they, Obi?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm excited. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. I would say this is one every time we have Mark on, I'm always excited.
What
But
about me?
something.
What about me? You should be excited about me.
Well, no,
Well, I brought Mark into the.
I think it's that exciting, Anna, actually.
Hmm. I don't like it, if I'm honest. No, I think you're right, it is exciting. Mark, brings a very, very level-headed, uh, discussion to the table and will quite happily go, "Ruby, you're wrong. Annie, you're wrong." He doesn't ever say, "Obi, you're wrong." He goes, "Annie, you're wrong." And I think, we're lucky to have him on board because he is so open-minded and so willing to listen, which is a key skill of a commissioner, listen, but also able to say to the providers he's now working with, way far, far away from Dorset, we're having a tough time too. And I think the one thing you and I do all the time is we're trying to say, everybody calm down and everybody try and find kindness. And I know I go on and on about it, but kindness is what makes it all work, because at the end of the day, that person that we care for, my brother, your mum, whoever, that's the person that we're trying to achieve the end goal for. So if we're nitpicking and snipping and bashing each other, we're never going to get anywhere. We have to just collaborate, work together. And Obi, your role writing those tenders for the care providers, filtering into the local authorities is critical to go, we're going to work together. So we are fast approaching Christmas. Obi, do you have a Christmas tree up? No.
No, but it's because I have a 1-year-old, and you can't. How do you have a Christmas tree and a 1-year-old?
We just put the decorations at the top. It's really clear. There's nothing for about the first 3 feet, and then they just have a few at the top. I've done it 4 times, but I've got Bengals, and they just smash the crap out of the tree. But you need your tree up, Obi.
I
It'll
don't
make
know
it
if I
more
have to.
active.
No, no, I don't know. I'll think about it.
Okay, I'm sending you a tree as well. Microphone and a tree. And Uncle Onion, who's my brother with Down syndrome, is coming over on Saturday because my partner has his Christmas tree in the kitchen. Okay, and it's decorated with a spirit level and one of those laser
Very
things.
cool.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Whereas we just vomit onto our tree and it looks absolutely spectacular.
Anything at it.
And watch this space. They watch the space for the best tree
And
ever.
some of the photos.
So that is us tonight. It is nearly 9 o'clock. My where's your glass? Let me see. Oh, we've matched, although I did top one up halfway through. Did you? No.
No.
And it interesting. Today we've talked about the Employment Rights Act. We've talked about Mark at the National Children and Adult Services meeting. I've been interested in what he had to say about Stephen Kinnock, because I'm following that journey and I need him to understand that the care sector professionals. I've been really interested in the Chris Badger bit on CQC, and actually that was an interesting debate actually, and you were learning a bit about that, which was interesting because 1 inspection per month per inspector for the care sector. I think we might need to consider the capacity there.
But why was that of particular interest to you? Apart from,
Because
of course, we need to know, yes, the local authority is now, they are now being rated by CQC. Yes, that's important. But apart from that, why is it so important to you?
Because at the end of the day, local authorities we're shutting down. We've got CQC coming in. We can't cope with anything else. Oh, there's a fire at the local, children's party or whatever. We can't deal with any of that. We're on CQC. And Mark was really clear about that. That's not right. because they knock on our door at 2 a.m. They turn up at 9 a.m. The amount of times when I was a registered manager, when you open the front, they go, "Hello, CQC." And I'm like, okay, you should always be ready. You should always be ready, and you should have nothing but transparency. But the local authorities have had 6 to 9 months to prepare, and then they're like, "We can't talk about anything because we're bringing the inspection." So it's interesting for me to hear Mark's take on it, and it was really good that he said, "I think things are going to change because we've
Down. He broke
cut a
it
lot of
down
plan."
in his
And also,
way.
off,
Logic.
Ofsted, who maybe people don't know, that's the education regulators. So the children's services with local authorities, they get the same as us. They get ding dong, hello, we're here today. So I'm interested to see how this grows and changes. But I also think it's really important that we do keep mentioning that it's one inspection per month, not for local authorities, but for care providers. And there are care providers out there waiting to be re-inspected who had an inadequate rating 5 years ago and are now really, really good. So we're paying a regulator
We should do an
who have
episode
the
about it.
capacity.
Perhaps when we can invite someone from CQC to speak on that.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong, CPC are going great guns and they're really keen to move forward. And Chris Badger is definitely looking at the way forward. To wrap this up, we also talked about the Employment Rights Act bill coming in, maybe not coming in. Answer the goddamn budget by the 18th of December.
In the zeitgeist. That's right in the zeitgeist. Yes.
God,
Please talk about it.
You're very clever on that.
And here's our pre-recorded episode with Mark. Enjoy.
Okay, and here's our frequent flyer, Mark. We are welcoming back while Obi takes a rather large glug of red wine. So while she's doing that, I'll do the same. Mark, welcome back. One of our questions is, how's your week been?
I do care to explain how my week has been. Let me do that. So it's Monday as we're recording this. So last week was the National Children and Adult Social Care Conference. So I was down in, well, not sunny Bournemouth, which was, but it was a good couple of days actually, catching up obviously with colleagues and hearing about some of the current themes that are in the air. And just for anybody who doesn't know, the National Children and Adult Social Care Conference is run by the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services and the Association of Directors of Children's Services with support from the Local Government Association. So it's very much a kind of get together of people in the local government social care world, together with, partners, so suppliers, some of the key, the Home Care Association, UK Home Care Association were there, for example, but also some of the big care groups sometimes are there. HC1 are there often as a sponsor, and NHS colleagues, and there were some provider voices there as well in some of the sessions I was in. So it is very much a kind of, the local government trade show type play, but with some other shindig, a little bit of shindig, with other voices.
Care industry, a little bit of the care, little bit of every aspect of the care industry is there.
Yeah, a little bit of that.
Did you feel like, because you've just said some of the care providers there, did you feel like they were well represented, underrepresented?
I mean, I think it could have been. I think it could always be, more of those voices in the room. That's helpful. There's always a big theme actually, and ADAS, the Association Director of Adult Social Services in particular, push very hard on co-production as a theme with people who draw on support. So a lot of the sessions have always a voice from Think Local Act Personal or the National Co-Production Advisory Group. And again, that's sort of kind of helpful. So that's been, I think, the last good few years now, that's been a kind of common theme. Possibly, I guess, because there are things like the Care Show and there are other forums. Maybe this, as a sector, we're sort of splitting ourselves into these conversations, and with the best will in the world, there's only so many that people can go to. So
But I think there should be more, Mark, where we're all together, because you're right, there's these kind of offshoots and splits, but actually more commissioners, care providers, suppliers should be in the same room. Do you think, Obi?
Or conferences like this, apart from the obvious, which is bringing every voices together, but why is it had? Well, like you mentioned, having themes, co-production. So why would ADAS put this conference together?
So I think the main thrust of the conference is the professional network of directors of adult social services. So for people who don't know, again, directors of adult social services and directors of children's services are statutory roles that every local authority has to have. Well, 153 top tier local authorities have to have. And carry a set of statutory responsibilities personally on behalf of the organisation. So it starts, I think, those two bodies are their professional network, and then there's a sort of wider. So I'm because I'm an independent consultant, so I'm an ADAS associate, which is a sort of network of people who have been members of the association through their roles, because you can be a member either as a statutory director or a director of commissioning or a director of operations, principal social workers, principal occupational therapists. So all of those roles are kind of have networks, and it's just bringing all of those voices together. Now, there's quite a few local authorities don't send anybody, actually, which I always think is such a missed
Are you being
opportunity.
representative of every local authority?
Yeah, and and each region has its own network. So there's kind of working groups going on all the time.
Oh yeah, because you saw Ada's East, for example.
So Southwest London, all that sort of.
Yeah.
So it's all going on all the time. The big conference once a year. I think there's sometimes a sense that, oh, we don't need to be at that. It's just a kind of a jolly or whatever. I think it's really important if you're spending quite a lot of money employing people at that level. Actually, I think this is an important part of how you make sure you're looking out beyond the council and beyond the local area, and thinking about the issues in social care and what's going on.
So Anna, why didn't you go? Why were you not there?
Uh, not welcome, I don't think, because I challenge everyone. It's not a forum that I would ever consider going to. It's not a forum that I think we're invited to. And I think there's a point here that one of the providers that you named is a big provider and sits at the top table. And when I say top table, advises government. And actually, that irks me because there are many small to medium providers who have incredible skills who could also sit there. But I was looking at the kind of speaker list, guest list, Mark, and I saw that Stephen Kinnock was there. So tell me a bit about what he had to say, because he's obviously linked to Neil Kinnock. And from our day, because we're very old and Obi is just a baby, as are our producers, I'm really interested to see if he does understand the care sector and what he says is heard. And you go, yeah, I get that. You understand us.
So I thought his speech this time round, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because as soon as this starts, I'm a bit like, yes, we know this. Yes, we've heard of this. I thought actually, since the last time, he was a bit more rounded in how he talked about social care and what it is and what it does.
Okay.
And I thought that was actually quite interesting to hear. I think last time it very much came across as a sort of, we were this sort of adjunct to the NHS. We were in the process. We were part of a process. Whereas this time it was much more about people's lives. He talked about what we were learning from the CQC reports that have been published so far into local authorities, some of the themes. Talked about some of the stuff on fair pay. We could talk about that shortly because there was a whole session on the fair pay agreement. I know it's a bit of a theme that you're talking about. Kind of referenced a couple of cross-government things. So, for example, getting voices heard in the consultation on immigration reform, and making sure the care sector gets its voice heard in that, which was helpful. Had obviously been thinking about direct payments and independence and interdependence. Was I think a frame that came out.
So what's a good question though? Is that lip service? Is it lip service or is it real? Did you feel like, because I know the last time we heard a lot of conversation from Mr. Kinnock, there was a lot of us saying, oh, but we know this. And like you said, did you feel like this time he was like, okay, I'm learning and I get it and I want to do this? What did you feel?
I think the other bit about last time was the framing was he came to the national conference right after they'd announced the national living wage and the employer's national insurance changes, with a line about, well, you've got some money, you've given you some money, so, off you go and get on with it. And kind of that just landed like the kind of cup of cold sick you'd expect it to, because actually we weren't given the money for that, and no amount of kind of spinning it kind of cuts the ice on that at all. So this time it wasn't quite that same context, and I genuinely think it was a more soundly based in what we understand social care to be. So the importance of direct payments, because it allows people to take control of their own care and support more. It's one option. And he did talk about, got to get that right. Some people have talked to me about how sometimes it's too bureaucratic and it's too difficult, and we put all these hurdles in the way, and people have to prove themselves all the time that they're spending the money in the right way. We need to make that easier and more kind of trusting as a way of people taking their care and support. So there were elements that are actually like, yeah, okay, it's interesting to hear a minister talking about something that feels like quite a bread and butter debate that's happening at the front line around how does the direct payment system work.
I'm just going to do that bit that I always do with you and Obi, which is where I say direct payments. A direct payment is where an individual who is vulnerable in some way is given money by the local authority to spend on care provision of their choice. And it's really important because that's personal decisions, being really in charge of the choices of what you want and how you want it. And I think moving on slightly, I noticed that we had Chris Badger there from CQC. That's interesting.
So he was talking about beyond the baseline CQC assessment into the future, and of course very much based around CQC assessment of local authorities. So if you want the kind of headlines as to where they're up to at the moment, 153 authorities which have social care responsibilities.
Oh, very impressive. Would you say that's impressive? I would say that's impressive.
Well, just hold a second. So so where they're at the moment, 153 have been contacted. So everybody's in the process at the moment. They all know they've got a date. 141 have had their site visits. And actually that was last week. So I know, for example, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole are having theirs this week. So it's 142 at least now. 85 reports have been published, of which 3 are outstanding, 55 are good, 25 requires improvement, and 2 are inadequate. So that's the kind of headline at the moment.
Well, I can say to you that today I've been involved in the Dorset CQC meeting with the care providers, and it was a really interesting take actually on how they delivered it. Really good questioning, really subjective questioning, thoughtful questioning, good opportunities for people to speak, hurried people along so there was no but opportunities for people to say how they felt. And was also present at another one for Dorset. And so being a part of that's been really interesting. In answer to Obi's question, do I think that's enough? I mean, they haven't got the staff and they haven't got the time, the capacity. And at the moment, across the country, the commitment is 1 inspection per month per inspector. So,
Yes.
Mark, what happens if you're in the 2 local authorities that are like, oh my God?
If you get a score of 1 out of the 4 in a domain that is not well led, so is the safe and, well, it's slightly different in the local authority framework around planning for care needs and some of the other stuff. I haven't got the thing in my head at the moment. But if you get a 1 in those, then there's a referral to the Secretary of State, a Section 50 referral to the Secretary of State. And then there's basically, it triggers a sort of an oversight and a kind of action, an improvement plan and so on. So the 2 inadequates definitely will have had that. Potentially of the 25 that requires improvement, some of them might have just been 2s all the way through. Some of them might have had a 1 in some of their domains, and that might have triggered the same oversight. But the expectation is, I think, that if you're good or outstanding, then there's it's a couple of years before you'll see CQC again, except there will be, and a bit like the Ofsted arrangements with local authorities for overseeing children's services, you'll get an annual visit. So effectively, you'll submit a kind of data return, you'll have a conversation, they'll get a sense of what's happening with that local authority. And then that will play into, if something kicks off, and a big incident happens or something, they can frame that then because they've had a conversation with you along the way, and so they can go back in if they're prompted to by events. So
But that's effectively the same as doing your provider return, your PIR, isn't it? So, a provider supporting carers and individuals, they will be asked by CQC to fill in a document probably once a year, maybe a little bit longer, which says, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is how we do it. And that's quite right, because I do find it quite fascinating. And I know Obie and I have giggled about it a few times, that when the local authority go, I'm really sorry, we can't do anything for the next 4 months because we've got a CQC inspection. And you think, are you joking? They just turn up on our doorstep, or they give us a week's notice and go, we need 974 documents. We need to see most of the families. Could you produce a urine sample? And, it's whereas you guys go, oh, I've got quite a few months, but we're all going to panic.
What probably give you some kind of some comfort on that is that our colleagues in children's services also think the same, because Ofsted is you get the phone call on the Monday morning and basically you submit your information by the end of the week and they're in on the following week. So the idea that CQC gave us months of notice to kind of start preparing our information. Yeah. So I suspect that will change. That once they've done the first round of them, they've done an evaluation then of what all the reports are saying and how they've framed it. I think that will start probably to build up to being a little bit more in that vein, I would have thought.
I wonder how with local authorities now being inspected, how that's going to affect the relationship between local authorities and providers. Because I find, or from speaking to providers, sometimes the quality teams can be quite harsh, especially when it comes to compliance. But now that local authorities are being rated, I wonder, Anna, do you get feedback from either people you support who has seen a difference ever since Dorset has had?
Well, I mean, I think it's a really, really good question and a brilliant observation. The bottom line is I work with all the care associations across the country, and we chuckle, because they're going, we can't take any phone calls, and, we can't do commissioning for a couple of weeks, and, brokerage are busy. And you sort of think, well, you have to, yourselves in the shoes of the providers. We are going through this all the time. It could be a 9 a.m. or a 9 p.m. in the middle of the night. Hello, CQC here. I like CQC. I know that they're trying to put themselves in the best place, and I know that they're trying to listen. And one of the things I will say is you need, as providers, to fill in the consultation process with CQC. It is essential to get your voices heard, because they're actually asking, and I think they're listening. But how do I feel about that, Obi? I hope so, but I don't know how they're going to be in our shoes. Sorry, Mark, you're in the room, but when they've had weeks and months to prepare, because we don't. And when the QA team rock up and have a chat with us, they don't even always ask the same questions CQC asks. So I'm hoping that them spending time going through this process, they'll understand that there's not enough alignment and not enough collaboration where one size fits all. Mark, what do you think?
So I think I agree on the point on CQC and how they are at the moment and how they've done. So on this process, it's the first round. It's the first go through 153 local authorities, seeing how this process lands and how it works. They already have said that basically if you're in the end stages, which, Dorset, as you just referenced, will be, and a number of other local authorities, it's sort of getting better and slicker as it goes on. It was really clunky at the start, and it's getting sort of more effective. So I think there's two things. One, does it put you in the shoes of providers? Well, no, it doesn't really. I mean, I think the duties on a local authority sort of are more diffuse in how they apply relative to being a nominated individual or a registered manager. So I think there's a difference there immediately.
I'm going to jump in again because I think it's really important for people who don't understand our sector.
Good.
So a registered manager is somebody who runs a service. So it could be a care home, a nursing home, supported living, and they are responsible for everything that goes on, and they are the person who reports to CQC. An NI, otherwise known as nominated individual, is the person who has ultimate responsibility, and should things go wrong, commonly known as Pete Tong, they could well go to prison. Their name is above the door. So those two roles are incredibly responsible roles.
And I think the thing I'd just distinct, because if you think in terms of, so the statutory director of adult social services is responsible for ensuring that the system is safe and that there's the right safeguarding processes in place across the local authority area. Now, that seems like a huge responsibility, and it is, but equally, there's a lot of moving parts to that. So it's a very diffuse kind of responsibility to make sure there's a system, even if sometimes that goes a bit wrong. Actually, there's a holding system, there's checks and balances, people are there to pick things up.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're, the registered manager of a small learning disability care facility with half a dozen people on it, their lives are in your hands if it goes horribly wrong. So it's a different kind of And I think so. CQC are looking at different things there. So does it put us in your shoes? No, it doesn't. Does it, however, provide a point at which your voice comes into a formal evaluation of the local authority and how it behaves? Yes, it does, because I think there's quite an emphasis CQC has on collecting the views of providers in the patch as to how that local authority performs in its relationships, and not just in the relationships, but how care planning is it consistent, are the safeguarding processes easy to access and clearly understood, etc., etc., etc. So I think that is the bit that over time I think will become a more powerful part
And
of the
I'm going to
conversation.
do my usual where I throw in a meanie pants question, which is I've spoken to various providers and various members of care associations, and one of the things that has been slightly worrying, and it's not pointing any fingers, but it is a question, is that providers go in, they have the conversation with CQC, some of it actually leaks out, and somehow local authorities may or may not use it against those providers. So it needs to be a really safe space. I'm not saying it's CQC, because I don't think it is. I think it's possibly sometimes other providers leak information. But we need to feel when we do things like this that we're able to say, this particular local authority, they're brilliant at this, but they're not so good at that. Do you know what I mean, OB?
Yeah, when you say other providers leaking information,
No, I didn't say other providers leak information. I'm saying that who knows how that information gets out. But in a very safe space, you should have the ability to have freedom of speech, shouldn't you? So how do we protect that?
Well, so my take on that would be, as a senior leader in the adult social care sector, it's our job to make sure. One of the fundamental jobs I think about leading an adult social care function is to ensure that it's open and transparent, and that you're listening to what's happening around the system that you're trying to steward and help manage and so on, and that you're open to challenge, and that how could we operate as a local authority expecting our providers to operate with us with transparency, responsibility, and how can you even think that you're going to be able to get a good score in a well-led domain, frankly, if that's how using information against a provider? I mean, we all know that some providers will have quite a negative view about a local authority, whilst others will think that they're brilliant partners and they really enjoy working with them. So, some people have a great experience of a care provider when they're receiving their social care. Other people have a terrible experience. So, those voices are always out there. I find it just an
I feel like it
absolute.
depends on what's shared, isn't it? So, for example, I want to ask you something, Mark. As if a provider, for example, goes to CQC and says, "Oh my goodness, there's been an incident, and there's been an omission," like something like that, that's put the person's life at risk. So, when you say, Anna, the provider has gone to CQC and they've shared something, it's obviously something negative. So, what is the extent at which CQC, a commissioner, could provide support? What's that boundary? Is it you can share? Obviously, you as a provider, you are supposed to know what your statutory duty is. But what are the boundaries? What is a no-no? So if you share this, yes, expect that it is going to be shared with other people in that space. I'm just putting it out there.
This is the point when you're sat in a room with CQC during the local authority inspection. And
Okay, and then you say to them,
they're asking a question. So let's say, for example, I don't know, any local authority in CQC says, tell me about the safeguarding. How do you feel the safeguarding team and the QA team respond to you? And there's 10 providers in there, and 3 say, do you know what? Sometimes I don't think they're quick enough, or sometimes they're really quick to jump on us. Maybe they need to back off a bit. Now, that's a really fair comment. That's just their view. It's factual. But it would appear across the country at some point, sometimes in those meetings, that information is cascaded back to some of the commissioners. Now, it could have come from anybody in that room. And I just think there have been occasions where it appears that may have been a bit of a stick to beat some of the local, the providers.
The other bit, of course, is that these focus groups aren't very big.
No.
So you have 6, 8 providers having a focus group with CQC. Like when CQC feedback what they heard at the end of the inspection, because you get a sort of Friday debrief from them as well as then the report that follows. Most times you'll probably be able to think, "Oh, I know who said that." But again, I'd sort of say it's difficult, isn't it? Can we do anything about that as a system? No. Can we do it as proper, like taking leadership seriously and bringing kind of authenticity and transparency to it? Yes, we can. We can all do that. So yes, you've got something to say. Now, if it's not evidenced, if we don't agree, then I think the other bit that actually is the responsibility on CQC, and I don't think they're quite there yet with doing this,
Okay.
is to triangulate that to make sure that it's not just one person's thing they said in a focus group, but actually they said, if they said the quality team turn up and they never seem to have the right data on them, okay, how do you use your data? What data do you go out there with? Let's show us what you take to a visit so that we can evaluate whether what we've just heard has some merit to it.
But Mark,
I think that's
some of those people sat at the table are handpicked. I know that so and across the country. So if those people are handpicked or cherry-picked, they're the people who are probably gonna say the best things about you. But actually, you should have, exactly like you just said, Obi, parity and equity is have some people who don't think you're brilliant either in the room, because that's fair. What do you think, Obi?
Yeah, I agree. But Mark, could you tell us a bit more about, you wanted to speak about the Fair Pay Agreement because you were giving us a rundown about the conference. So you wanted to
Yeah.
speak more about the Fair Pay Agreement?
Yes, let's wrap up CQC. Yes, definitely. No, because just the one last bit on that is, don't forget there is the survey. So they do put out to hear from anybody who's a provider in an area to get commentary. So it's not only the people in the room at this focus group. So just
Okay.
worth saying that.
Could we say a little bit more on that? Because providers do listen. We do have a lot of providers that listen to our podcast, and they may want to have to say. So could you just say a little bit more around that, how they can go about it, what information is used for, and the value it could bring?
So if I am right, and actually, Anna, you might need to help me on this, so I'm just going to be really honest about this. I thought that CQC put out to the registered providers in the area they're about to inspect the local authority of inviting a completion of an online questionnaire or comments or so on. But like comment, because actually I don't think I've seen what actually goes to them. I know something goes.
What's the communication channel? When you say
Yeah.
through the registered managers, is it sent to their email or is it through the groups?
So it'll be the registered email address, generally of the registered manager, although they are changing quite rapidly. I can't say that's happening effectively, but it is happening. But unfortunately, I think what we have second board is providers, and Obi and I know this, are overwhelmed with, can you answer this survey? Can you fill in this QR code? Can you do this? And sometimes just have no clue what a priority is. That is a real priority because you need to have your say. And there are local authorities do brilliant things as well as some bloody awful things, and some bloody awful things, but some spectacular things. But that is good. That gives you a good. You can't be outstanding all the time. You can't require improvement all the time. But I think, Mark, you're possibly right, but I don't think, bearing in mind that millions and millions and billions of pounds are spent on their high-tech system, CQC system that doesn't work. So it's probably unlikely that they got all the right people at the right time.
But the other bit then we have to say, don't we, Anna, is and we could perhaps wrap up the CQC section of this, which is, as you recall, I came, I think, to the Dorset Care Association annual conference and did the spiel about we're about to be CQC inspected, keep an eye out, there will be an opportunity to comment, etc. And so again, the partnership with the care associations is an important one for opening up that dialogue. And if somebody says, how do I feedback? Then you also can have a role then in helping to say, well, actually, we'll let you know when the time comes and you can make sure your view gets into CQC.
And the last wrap-up bit, and Obi and I have just been talking about this, is it is critical as care providers that you complete the CQC consultation. And one of the things I'm doing this week is talking with a large legal firm for providers about this is what the questions mean. Because even the questions are like, what? Pardon? So it's breaking down the questions so that providers can answer it to the best of their abilities to get what they need for the people that they support. Obi is desperate to talk about the Employment Rights Act because she loves it. But I think, Mark, I was looking at this now. It was Tundra Foster from Devon County Council, Mark, talking about that, you said?
So the session was chaired by Sally Warren, who is the Director General of Adult Social Care at the Department of Health and Social Care. And yes, Tundra was one voice on behalf of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. She's the commissioning lead nationally and is, as you say, Devon County Council's Director of Adult Social Services. We had somebody from Unison, somebody also speaking from who was the head of Adult Social Care Pay and Careers for the Department of Health and Social care, who's working obviously with the Department of Business and Trade on what this is going to look like as a piece of employment legislation. And then Think Local Act Personal were involved as well as a user voice.
Okay.
So I thought it was really interesting. So there's a whole thing, and people might know that this is coming. So a negotiating body for adult social care, an annual negotiation, very much feeling like, so in local government, we know this all the time because there's an annual negotiation between the employers and the trade unions every year. Kind of strong roles potentially for the trade unions, which is going to be an interesting dynamic for
Yes,
some of the
yeah.
smaller providers in particular.
And I really think, and Obi and I were talking about this earlier, that I think you said Guy Collis was there from Unison,
Yes.
and Obi and I both know Gavin, and that's our long-standing care sector representation in terms of unions. But we need unions. It's really important, and we need
Agreed.
to be able to have representation in tricky situations, and we need care providers to recognise that. And unions you shouldn't be frightened of them. They're there to actually support you in so many ways. And, the old fashioned hobnail boots stomping into meetings, it's not like that. But we do need that. But I think one of the things that we should talk about, and I know Obi's got lots of questions because she was asking me earlier, and it was really interesting how Obi saw it, is that there's a lot of preparation that the providers are going to have to do should a lot of this come through. And, the consultation, and Obi just asked just now, ends on the 18th of December. And I cannot emphasize enough, if we do not respond to this, this is a biggie. The stuff that is coming our way is monumental, and we need to come
Have
up
your
with
say
reasons.
now so you don't complain later.
Yeah,
This is the time to have your say.
yeah.
So Anna, could you please speak a bit more about that? Because it's important that people know that the Employment Rights Bill is still in the consultative phase. So this is the time where you could say whatever you want to say. Most recently there was a recent change.
Well, the reality is last week, the fact that you could sack somebody or ask somebody to leave your employment, you had to be employed for 2 years before it became an opportunity for somebody to say, that's not okay. But that was going to be taken to day one. So from the day that Mark started working for me, God help us all, that I could say on day 3, do you know what, Mark, you haven't quite made the grade, so I'd like you to leave. Now, I'd never say that to Mark because he would always make the grade. But the reality is, can you imagine, without doing the right due diligence, knowing the right HR, having all of the, the kind of responsible conversations that you'd have to have with somebody, and then on day 3, you say it's not going to work, and they go, right, we're going to an unfair dismissal.
Yeah.
And luckily, somebody somewhere thought this isn't actually a very good idea, because especially in care, you imagine if the 3 of us here took people on and their values are wrong, they were abusive towards somebody that we needed them to support, or they're abusive to another carer that they worked with, or stole from a resident who was vulnerable. We need to get rid of that person.
Yeah. So you're making reference to the rights to unfair dismissal from day one, because that was the most recent change to the Employment Rights Bill during this consultative phase. So we were having a conversation about this earlier about why is it so what is the impact of it? What is the value? What is the difference between having rights to unfair dismissal from day one versus from 2 years, which it used to be 2 years later, or 6 months?
Well, I get the feeling Mr. Tyson is chomping at the bit. Come on, Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I think what the people who support rights from day one would say, I mean, in the examples you've just given, they're quite at the heavy end of disciplinary sanctions. You could dismiss somebody immediately for having stolen from a service user, or from, you've got the kind of levers to do that.
Yeah.
I suppose low grade performance challenges are the ones that I think are trickier to manage. But they also say that it doesn't mean that you can't have a probation period. A probation period is still would have been still allowed even with the day one protections in place. It's now going to be 6 months, and most organizations' probation periods are 6 months, or maybe sometimes a year, but 6 months. So that kind of will align. It's probably neater.
There's another point.
But I think they would. I think people would have pushed back a bit on whether or not you'd have the levers to act in those sorts of situations.
The other point to that is, Mark, that we have a responsibility to train our registered managers and our deputy managers on processes and policies and HR. I mean, let's just chuck more at them to take on. But the reality is,
Employment law.
Yeah, and the reality is, if you've got a
Mm.
positive skill set, actually, if somebody isn't quite making the mark, you need to help them along the way. And, those regular supervisions and those one-to-ones and those mentoring and all those bits and pieces. And that's where Unison and various other trade unions who will be, supporting this can come on
Yeah.
board. So it is a right of protection for people. But like you've said, Mark, yeah, I did talk about the heavy-handed stuff, but also you do know sometimes that somebody's values aren't right in care from day two. And we have to take that on board. And Obi and I talk about values all the time, don't we, Obi, about how important it is to have.
Yeah. And I have a question for you, Mark. So with the so with the employment, right, whilst I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, as a tender writer, when one of the documents that you get is a contract from the local authority. Well, actually, not even the contract. Before we get to the contract, in the ITT, it says clearly on the local. It's an intention to tender. So it's an intention. It's a document basically. And it could be in any one of the multiple documents that's set out by the local authority in all of the documents that make up the tender process. So what they specifically say is they are under no obligation to guarantee hours. It's there. So with the Employment Rights Bill coming, it says this is a bill to ensure that workers are given consistent hours. What should providers be thinking about? How could that's not what I wanted to ask. How can commissioners work with providers? What is a conversation that should be had? Because the way referrals come in, as an example, is through the brokerage team, you get 3 calls a day. You get the referral come in. Can you deliver 3 calls a day, 15 minutes calls? You say yes. But then typically what a provider will do, and Anna, please come in, look, correct me if I'm wrong, is you would maybe offer a 0-hour contract, and that's how you mitigate that. So you build on those hours. But the local authority, they don't guarantee hours. They don't have consistent hours. But then yet to have the Employment Rights Bill saying you have to guarantee workers' hours. So the law says one thing, but then how public procurement works is the complete opposite. So how do you balance it?
Right, I'm going to break this down then from the Anna perspective. So the calls that you're talking about are visits, aren't they? So for anybody
The visit.
who doesn't know what Ovi's talking about, in some cases, a local authority may purchase 15-minute visits for people. No, they shouldn't, but sadly that they no. And I agree with you, Mark. I agree, but unfortunately there are cases. But the situation is that over time now, we're looking at part of the consultation is, okay, people on a 0 hours contract, which is really difficult for people on a 0 hours contract because it might be that all that's available to them. Now, you then go and take on a role on a 0 hours contract, even as an agency worker going to a care home. And after a 12-week period, you're going to have to be offered guaranteed hours. Now, Mark picked me up earlier. It's not full time. It could be 16 hours. It could be 20 hours. But that falls on the duty of that care provider. And Obi is quite rightly saying, so I'm bidding for a tender. You're offering me this. I take it. Then I don't get those hours that you're giving me. And I've taken somebody on because the law told me to.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to take a slight step back to kind of break the question down as well, actually. So one thing is a care agency, we're assuming that a care agency majority relies on the business from the local authority.
Yeah.
And
we're
actually,
assuming
of
that.
course, the local authority is just one purchaser in an area. It might be the big purchaser, but for a lot of agencies, it might not be a big purchaser because they might not deal with the local authority. So there's something about just thinking the challenge is something that local authority needs to have a conversation, a dialogue with the care market about.
Okay.
But it's not only sitting on us as a purchaser. It's a bigger question about how you operate with the NHS, with the councils, and the self-funders. And if you're operating in the self-funder market, you're going to have to operate with the kind of variability that comes with that. And almost we need to perhaps have the conversation that thinks, how do you operate? What's the principles of safely operating as much as you can to insulate your business from the ups and downs of lots of different people buying your services and changing their minds and it going up and down, and you're trying to kind of match your staff hours to the people who are buying it, and then add the local authority in as a significant purchaser.
Okay,
Now,
Mark,
I
this goes back
go-
to answer the consultation as provided
yes,
because
Obi's praised it as an issue because Yeah, sorry.
No, no,
Yeah, no.
no.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. I was just echoing what you were saying. Yes, this is an opportunity to have your voice as providers because the nature of the care industry actually doesn't quite support that. So you need to explain to, well, I'm sure that there are voices within care, but this is why your voice needs to be heard.
And I think that's why we're trying to break it down because we're saying we understand why, because people on 0 hours contracts need protecting big time. There is no question because it's open to abuse. But we
Yeah.
also need to protect providers, companies who need to use those. And actually, there are many people who are quite happy to be on a 0 hours contract because it works for what they need, but they do need that protection. So how do we make it work?
And I suppose one temptation to manage it, just thinking about the logic of how you might manage this, and it's not something I've had to do particularly, but you can imagine people who currently have a full-time contract where in order to be able to insulate the business from the risks associated with that, to get the people on 0 hours contracts onto a 16-hour minimum, the people on full-time have to go onto a 16-hour minimum, and then the remainder of their hours available to them fluctuates. So it could mean that actually you lose full-time care work because everything becomes a bit in the middle so that people can manage the vagaries of it. And, again, that would have to be, I think, a conversation that will work in, maybe that will work in some localities better than it works in others because there'll be different workforce makeups and so on. But it feels like there's a lot to talk about there, and it could
There's
be.
a huge amount to talk about, and that's why the consultation is there, and that's why we have to answer it. And I think for me, what I've taken away from this is that we have to be really clear as providers now. If this comes in on new contracts, new policies, new HR roles, scheduling, for example. If you're the scheduler running, and that's the person who's putting together the rotas and the visits, and Mrs. Miggins is here, but Brian is there, that will impact as well on the 0 hours contract and how that's doing, because as people build up their hours, so there's a whole lot of learning that is going to have to go on. And
And also, in addition to that, the way contracts are also bidding processes, frameworks. So I'm just putting it out there. I don't know in terms of how it's going to affect it, but I do believe there should be a conversation about the design of frameworks as well.
I'm just going to throw this in because I think this is really interesting, that we've also got the situation with harassment that's in there as well. So third party harassment is linked to this as well. And so that means that let's I'm like throwing the heavy hand a bit, but if one of your carers, your staff, is being harassed by a contractor or a service user or a family member, if you cannot evidence you've shown every form of, reasonable types of support to that person, we will be responsible for that as well. And how do we make that work? Because in the world of care, in the world of dementia, challenging behavior, let's use my brother, type 1 diabetes, Down syndrome, dementia, very challenging right now. Potentially there are days when he harasses me, let alone the staff. How do we manage that? Because that's another thing that's being brought in. And is that appropriate for the care sector, Mark?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say the bottom line, of course, is that nobody should be harassed at
No,
work. And I
absolutely.
think, yes, there are questions about behavior that challenges support services from the people who draw on support. But of course, I think the first port of call for managing that is where, what's the positive behavior support training?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do we need to then be back in conversations, which local authorities will not like to have, about sometimes there'll need to be double ups, or sometimes there'll need to be a carer on standby who can step into situations when they're so again, I think there are probably some chunky commissioning conversations that flow out of that. But fundamentally, that it's a bit of me who thinks that shouldn't be a new addition. Nobody should be getting harassed at work. They should feel they are trained enough to deal with those situations with the right techniques to de-escalate and all of that stuff. And maybe there's stuff there we need to get right, and that the system and the sector.
Family members as well. There's grief.
Yes. Well, yes. So sometimes that is downright, frankly, harassment,
Yeah.
and we know that the care sector is higher higher numbers of global majority representation relative to the people who are drawing on support, and sometimes that is, there's racism and there's all sorts of other kind of unpleasant factors at play. So that is outright has to be tackled and dealt with, and I would hope, again, just as a commissioner, if a local agency is having routine problems with some of that needs to be a conversation with the local authority, because there needs to be, it might not be just for that agency to try and deal with. It has to be a wider conversation about what's going on in an area, which is why it's good that local authorities run social care, because they are also responsible for community cohesion, for kind of community support and so on. And I think then using that is an important.
So, Obi, before we boot Mark off, because he's taken up enough airtime for him now. Listening commission. Yeah, me. Is the last bit is the fair pay, the Fair Work Agency that's going to come into play, and they're going to have the same, if not heightened, powers that HMRC have. And actually, there's a bit of me that's like, this is great. But there's another bit which says you've really got to understand the difficulties that we're up against. So, there's 200% penalties, for example, and they will be looking at SSP, which, will be coming in from day one now, just in case anyone isn't clear on that.
And what's SSP?
Statutory sick pay. Good on you. Called me out. Statutory sick pay. So, for example, day one, statutory sick pay, and we work on a basis that in the care sector, carers take off between 1 and 5 days per year per person. That's a lot of days. So if you look at your providers, you've got 300 people working for you. That's going to be £36,000 a year. If you've got 1,000 people working for you, that's nearly £160,000 a year on top. So there's lots of bits that are tricky. And if you're struggling with that and you're a tiny little provider and you haven't got an accountant, you haven't got this, you haven't got that.
And the care sector relies on people. It's a people.
It does. So just to finish, I'm just going to finish this because this is important. They've even got the right to say, so Mark's really annoyed to Sobi, right? We're done with him. And also we haven't paid him enough money and we're in a really tricky situation. But he says to the Fair Work Agency, I quite like Anna and Obi, so don't take it any further. And they'll say, no, we'll take it to a tribunal on your behalf. So this is massive, but people need protecting. I'm never going to take that away. But at the same time, there are providers making mistakes because they're navigating their way through international recruitment, national minimum wage, you name it. And the mistakes are going to be made. I'm zipping it now because I've banged on enough.
Well, one thought for me on that. So I wonder, this is coming in 2028. Part 2 of the Casey review is due 2028. And I wonder whether there's something about that review and lobbying to try and make sure that it looks at all of this stuff that's like been bolted on over years around how the care sector operates in some cases, and trying to rationalize some of that. There'll always be, it's a business employing people. There'll always be all the things that go with that.
Yeah.
But there is something about how we can simplify some of that. And just to add on with some of the conversations that were happening at the national conference, personal assistants directly employed by the people who draw on support. So there's no intermediate agency, and the people who are being employed, like all of this stuff applies to them. So that's an additional complexity, and that was brought up by the Think Local Act personal representative on the panel.
Okay, so just so I understand correctly, you think peers are going to have more compliance?
Well, all of this, it's employment law, so it all applies. So it's got to.
Everybody.
So it's not. So if it's complicated for a care agency employing 40 people to get their heads around, an individual employing another individual has got to get their head around it in some cases as well. So again, we've got to think about how that's going to change the appetite for people to take on a personal assistant with their direct payment into the future. We also had the colleague, his name I've completely gone out of my head, from the UK Home Care Association, who made a sort of question intervention in the session to point out that 30% of local authorities are currently paying under the amount for home care that would be required solely to cover national living wage, national insurance,
Exactly.
pension, travel and sickness.
So the impact
So-
isn't just on us, it's on you as
Yeah.
well.
And what I thought,
Go on.
well, what I thought about that is, if you are in an area where the local authority is paying less than, and sometimes there's a whole debate about whether or not you're getting volume and you're getting security for it. So I get all of that, but sometimes it's purely they are paying lower than actually ought to be sustainable to be able to employ somebody. This will force that issue. So 2028 is probably the horizon for local authorities to resolve any issues like that are in their commissioning. And some don't have that. Some pay a reasonable, fair price of care and all of that. Some don't. And I think this will force the issue.
I just want everyone to know that I'll be 57 by then and 3 years off retirement. So I'm just going to push on.
Yes.
Really, really valuable conversation. But you know what, Mark? You better do some serious thinking in the commissioning team. I know. And you know what? It is good to pontificate because some of the people who've been watching have said, we really like the fact that Anna prods Mark, Obi prods Anna prods Obi, and Mark just comes back with really valuable answers. And I think it's really important because I don't always get it. Sometimes I think, oh my God, you commissioners, and other times I think, oh my God, providers, be nice to commissioners. But I think with Obi, particularly with her role with tendering and working with all the local authorities, and my role with kind of keep everybody happy, it's really difficult to sometimes remember that commissioners are also humans. They're struggling. There's a limited amount of funds coming down to them. We're all going, you're mean, you're mean.
Easy to say some of this stuff in the abstract, in the theoretical. That's all very easy. We can all be kind of, great kind of Pollyanna-ish kind of. But when you're on the ground, when you're doing it, it's hard to make the shift quite a lot of the time. And that's just got to be acknowledged.
Well,
And
on that note,
for us all.
Mark, we've sorted out the world's difficulties and life and the universe. And thank you very much for being our frequent flyer. And we'll let you know when we need you. When we've got another thing that Obi and I go, Rebecca, Mark, we don't understand.
Thank you for asking about my experience at conference. Yeah.
Thank you, Mom.
All right, lots of love. Thank you.